Hi, hello, welcome to Vital Biology. This is Padma. In this video, we will study about transport of respiratory gases. So in the previous classes, we have discussed how exactly air from external environment reaches up to the lungs. And once it reaches to the lungs, how the oxygen diffuses into the blood and how the carbon dioxide again diffuses into the alveolar region. So that exchange also we have studied in the previous classes. So today, we are going to study about the transportation of the oxygen out of the transportation of the respiratory gases. So here transport of respiratory gases means both oxygen transport to tissues and from the tissues how the carbon dioxide reaches to the alveolus. Actually both the gases actually comes under this particular topic. But today we will mainly focus on transport of oxygen. Okay, so once oxygen moving from the alveolus into the blood, how come or through which of the means that oxygen reaches to the tissues? That is our main focus of this today's topic. So here in this picture also we are representing the same. That is once near the lungs, oxygen it enters into the blood, and especially here if you will see the mainly RBC. Okay, mainly RBC, how they are playing a major role in transport of that oxygen, and near the tissues or the organs region, how that oxygen is utilized, and as a result of that metabolic process, that waste, respiratory waste, that is carbon dioxide, once it is released, again how come it reaches to the lungs. Okay, so this is the overall representation of the transport of respiratory gases. Yes. Coming to the transport of oxygen. So transport of oxygen mainly occurs by the help of the red blood cells. Okay, as we know that in our blood we have three different type of the cells. RBC, that is of the red blood cells, WBC, white blood cells, and platelets. But out of these three different cells, RBC are the cells which are involved in transport of this oxygen mainly. Okay, how much it can help means about like 97% of the transport of oxygen is done by this particular RBC. Okay, 97% of transportation of the oxygen is mainly by the RBC, and 3% of the oxygen actually transport in the form of a dissolved state. So what is this dissolved state means? As we know that blood means not only the blood cells but even the fluid part also can be seen. Okay, so generally blood consists of mainly two of the components, blood cells and then the fluid part that is called as the plasma. Okay, so here inside the blood, yes, the fluid part is present. So in that fluid medium, now that oxygen will dissolve. So in that dissolved state, about 3% of the oxygen actually transports. Okay, so that is how 97% through the RBC and 3% that is in the form of a dissolved state that oxygen transports through the blood. Okay, so here you can observe in this picture that inside the RBC mainly one of a pigment is present, and which is a main component helps in transport of this oxygen, and that main component is the pigment that is of haemoglobin. Okay, so haemoglobin. I think already you know about this haemoglobin. Generally haemoglobin is considered as a respiratory pigment. Okay, as it gives a color to the cells, that is red color. That is why it is called as the pigment. As we know that any of the substance, when it has the ability to give color, such substances are called as the pigments. So that's why this hemoglobin is considered as a pigment. And this pigment is mainly involved in transport of these respiratory gases. That is why the main role as it is there in the respiration process, that is why hemoglobin is considered as a respiratory pigment. Okay. So now that respiratory pigment that is of the hemoglobin, that is present inside the red blood cells. So about like millions of hemoglobin molecules can be seen in single RBC. Yes, one of the RBC consists of millions of hemoglobin molecules. Okay, so that is why our RBC can like take about many of the molecules of the oxygen, that is in billions of oxygen molecules can be transported along with them. Okay, so such a RBC, now near the alveolar region, this hemoglobin is binding with the oxygen and then that oxygen will be transported up to the cells. There you can see that that oxygen is released from this RBC. See here, this blue color is actually we are indicating the oxygen. So that oxygen is coming and occupying the binding sites inside this hemoglobin. Okay. Now once they are occupied, they are traveling, and once it reaches to the cells, so those oxygen molecules now release it towards the cells. So this is generally how the transportation occurs through the RBC, that too especially hemoglobin, that here we can see in this picture. But do you think, is it every animal have such type of hemoglobin? So for that, here you can see these particular information. So generally all together from invertebrates to vertebrates, many of the respiratory pigments can be seen. Okay, so in that one of the pigment that is of the hemoglobin. So this hemoglobin can be seen in all vertebrates. Okay, all vertebrates. Hemoglobin, that is the respiratory pigment in all the vertebrates. Another one more respiratory pigment also can be seen, that is called as the hemocyanin. Okay, hemocyanin. So hemocyanin is present in the case of the molluscans and arthropods. Okay, molluscans and arthropods. And one more also is there, like chlorocruorin. Okay, chlorocruorin. So this is seen in especially marine annelids. Okay, like this. Even not only these three, so many other type of the respiratory pigments also can be seen in a various type of the animals. But in the case of the vertebrates especially, yes, the pigment is the hemoglobin. Generally, these respiratory pigments are actually considered as the metalloproteins. Okay, metalloproteins, as they consist of one of a metal. So in the case of the hemoglobin, the metal is actually iron, whereas in the hemocyanin, it consists of copper. Whereas in the chlorocruorin, yes, again it consists of iron. Okay, so here you can see that hemoglobin iron, hemocyanin copper, chlorocruorin that is of the iron. Okay, so generally the iron containing pigments, generally they will give the red color, whereas the copper containing will give the bluish color to the blood. So this is why that is the reason why in various animals we can see different type of colored blood. That is mainly depends on this type of the pigment which they constitute. Okay. If we will coming towards the hemoglobin, that is how in our blood the RBC, which is consisting of this hemoglobin, plays a vital role in transport of oxygen. And for that, yes, definitely we should know about the basic structure of the hemoglobin. As a hemoglobin is consisting of mainly two of the parts. One is the heme and another one is the globin part. Okay, another one is the globin. So one is the non-protein part, another one is the protein part. So altogether this hemoglobin consists of a protein which is made up of about 4 polypeptide chains. Okay, 4 polypeptide chains. So hemoglobin consists of 4 polypeptide chains. So here you can see one is the alpha 1, another one alpha 2, beta 1 and beta 2. So out of 4 polypeptide chains, 2 are the alpha chains and beta chains are 2. So together 4 polypeptide chains are observed. And generally this protein is in a quaternary structure. Okay, as we know that generally the proteins by their folding and their interactions, based on that they'll attain various structures like primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary structures. So in that way if we will study, yes, this hemoglobin is actually in a quaternary structure. Okay, and it consists of 4 polypeptide chains, 2 alpha and 2 beta. And suppose if this is of one of these, each of these boxes, if we will consider that as a polypeptide chain. Okay, in the center, so this particular part actually each of this polypeptide chain consists of one of the heme group. Okay, each polypeptide chain consists of one heme group. So this is a heme, this is a heme and this is the heme. Okay, and these heme molecule or the heme have a ability to bind with the oxygen. Okay, this heme can have a ability to bind with oxygen. So in this particular one of the hemoglobin, we can see total 4 heme groups. So that's why each one can bind with one oxygen. That means one hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen molecules. Okay. So here this is the one, here this is the one, and here this is one, and this is the one. So here like this, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4. So total 4 oxygen molecules. That's why we will say one of the hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen molecules. One hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen molecules. Why means? So this is the reason. Okay. Oxygen binds with hemoglobin and forms oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Oxyhemoglobin. And this reaction is a reversible reaction. Reversible reaction. Reversible reaction means how this oxygen when binds with the hemoglobin, it can forms the oxyhemoglobin. The same way, whenever the conditions, okay, supports, this oxyhemoglobin can again dissociate into oxygen and hemoglobin. So it can form a compound structure, and that compound structure again it can break and form this hemoglobin and oxygen. In both the way the reaction can occur, that is why it is called as a reversible reaction. Why? Such type of the nature we can see means it depends on some of the factors. So what are those factors that we will see here? See here, binding oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. So here just now we said hemoglobin, okay, and oxygen binding, mainly it depends on one of a main factor, that is partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, previous classes we have discussed this partial pressure of oxygen. So in a mixture of gases, when we will study about one individual gas pressure, that will be called as the partial pressure of that gas. So here that oxygen and the hemoglobin binding mainly depends on this particular factor, that is of the partial pressure of oxygen. Means wherever the partial pressure of oxygen is more, yes, that oxygen can bind with the hemoglobin and form the oxyhemoglobin. Okay, the same reverse condition. Wherever the partial pressure of oxygen is low, yes, obviously the oxyhemoglobin will split, dissociate into hemoglobin separately and oxygen separately. That is why here we said the reaction is reversible. Okay, so when the oxyhemoglobin forms, wherever the partial pressure of oxygen is more. When the partial pressure of oxygen is less, yes, oxyhemoglobin will dissociate into oxygen and hemoglobin. So here, along with the partial pressure of oxygen, some of the other factors can also play a major role in binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. See here, don't get confused. Here what we said is one of the factor, partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, that is the key factor which mainly influences this binding process. But along with that, some other factors also present, like partial pressure of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration, and then the temperature near that region. Okay, the oxyhemoglobin formation or a dissociation. For this reaction, along with the partial pressure of oxygen, some other factors also playing a role. So those are partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration and temperature. So how they affect, which one favors, which one actually will affect and helps in dissociation of oxyhemoglobin, that we will learn in this slide. See, oxygen dissociation curve, they told. The percentage saturation of the hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the partial pressure of oxygen. So here, just now whatever we said, the binding of this oxygen and the hemoglobin actually influenced by few of the factors, in which the primary factor is the partial pressure of oxygen. Yes, so both these when they are taking and try to plot a graph. Okay, so that is what here they told as that oxygen dissociation curve. See, percentage saturation. Percentage saturation means, so one of the hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen we said. Okay, So when one hemoglobin bound to 4 oxygen, then we will say it is completely 100% saturated. Suppose one hemoglobin only bound to 3 oxygen, then it is not fully saturated. When hemoglobin is bound to 2 oxygen molecules, half of the saturation only we can see. Okay, so that is what the saturation means here. Percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, so this of binding we are plotting against with the partial pressure of oxygen. The same thing what previously we have said. The main factor which is influencing this oxyhemoglobin formation is partial pressure of oxygen. If we want to study the relation with each other, we are trying to understand that in the form of one of a graph. Okay, so that graph is actually considered as the oxygen dissociation curve. So before going to that graph, we should understand few of the points. So those are, see here, oxygen plus hemoglobin. This is called as association. This is called as the association. But when this, so here oxygen hemoglobin together they will form the oxyhemoglobin. Suppose when this oxyhemoglobin again dissociates into oxygen plus hemoglobin. So these are the two ways of reaction. Okay, where one is called as the association. Association of oxygen hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. Another one is the dissociation, where the oxyhemoglobin break down to oxygen plus hemoglobin. Okay, so when this type of a condition occur, when this will happen, that is determined by few of the factors. So here we will first try to understand how this factor influences this association and dissociation, and then we will study the graph. So here the first one, when the partial pressure of oxygen is more. Okay, definitely the first factor as we told, the partial pressure of oxygen. So for the association, for the formation of this oxyhemoglobin, yes, definitely the partial pressure of oxygen should be more. Okay, more. And partial pressure of carbon dioxide should be less. Hydrogen ion concentration should be less. And temperature should be less. If you observe carefully, out of 4 factors, one of the factor is more, whereas the remaining all factors are less. Okay, that one factor which is more, that is the partial pressure of oxygen. When such a condition is seen, yes, definitely that favors the binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin and results in formation of oxyhemoglobin. So where these type of the conditions are occur in our body? Yes, that is nothing but near the alveolar region. Okay, near the alveolar region. Yes, near the alveolar region, here all these factors are available. As we know that in inhaled air, yes, compared with the blood, here the oxygen concentration is more. Okay, so that's why partial pressure of oxygen is more. Second, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is less. Yes, definitely near this region, okay, in the inhaled air, the carbon dioxide concentration is less when compared with the blood. So here CO2 concentrations are high, but near the alveolar region, the partial pressure of CO2 is less. And hydrogen ion concentration also should be less in that region. As we know that especially this carbon dioxide is the main reason for the increase of H plus ions. Hydrogen ion concentration is mainly depend on the carbon dioxide concentration. As we know that this carbon dioxide is transferred to the alveolus, that is why in this region there is a less amount of the carbon dioxide. When there is less CO2, obviously the hydrogen ion concentration also less. And why the temperature is less in the alveolar region? As we know that our body temperature is about like 37 degrees Celsius. But when we are taking the air from the external environment into our internal environment, yes, obviously that cool air when it comes, yes, it is like less temperature it maintains when compared to our body temperature. That's why we said the temperature near the alveolar region is less because of that cool air. Okay. So when these conditions are all available near the alveolar region, yes, near the alveolar region, we can see the association of oxygen and hemoglobin and results in formation of oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Next. Quite opposite, we can see in another region. So the other region is nothing but here tissues. Okay, tissues. As already tissues utilized the oxygen for their cellular respiration. That is why near the tissues region, near the cellular region, the partial pressure of oxygen is less. So when it is less, remaining all factors, definitely they will be more. Like partial pressure of carbon dioxide is more. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is more. Why? Because cells, after utilizing this oxygen and while liberating the energy, they'll also liberate the carbon dioxide, the metabolic waste here. The carbon dioxide levels are more in the cells. That is why we said more partial pressure of CO2. Then, when there is more CO2, as we told, yes, obviously the H plus ion concentration also will be more. H plus ion concentration is more. Then, as the metabolic reactions will continue in our cells, definitely the heat will be generated. So that's why the temperature is more near the cells. So this condition also we can observe in the tissues. Okay. Near the alveolar region, near the tissues region, the conditions are quite opposite. Why or how they'll maintain, that also just now we have studied. Okay. When such type of the conditions are available, yes, now that oxyhemoglobin, it cannot maintain because as the cells need the oxygen. That is why it leaves the hemoglobin and it reaches to the cells. That's why we can see the dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin into oxygen and hemoglobin. So that oxygen can now enter into the tissues. That's why dissociation is seen near the tissues region. Okay. Now we will go to the graph. So here as they told, so here we can see on this x-axis, okay, on this x-axis, here we took partial pressure of oxygen, okay. On the x-axis we took the partial pressure of oxygen, and whereas on the y-axis, hemoglobin percentage saturation, okay, hemoglobin percentage saturation. As previously also we said, when all the heme binding sites are filled with the oxygen, yes, we can say it as the 100% saturation. Okay, if it is not, yes, saturation will be decreased. Okay, and that relation we will study in this graph. And here if you notice, yes, as when they have plotted this, they got one of a S-shaped curve. Okay, S-shaped curve. That is why it is called as the sigmoid curve. Okay, for the sigmoid, we are representing it as a S-shaped curve or the sigmoid curve. Okay, and as it is like giving the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and oxyhemoglobin saturation and how near the alveolar region. Okay, so near the alveolar region, how the association is more, that is saturation is more, whereas going towards the tissues, okay, going towards the tissues, yes, the factors are completely varying, which are not favoring that association. They result in dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so generally in the normal condition, yes, this is the one, the red color represents the normal sigmoid curve. Okay, but here you can see near the alveolar region, this particular shift, that is this particular curve will move towards the left side. Okay, this will move towards the left side. Why? Because near the alveolar region, the partial pressure of oxygen is more. When it is more, yes, obviously hemoglobin can bind more with the oxygen. All the binding sites of the hemoglobin can get the oxygen. That's why saturation will be more. That is why this will move towards the left side. Okay, But wherever the oxygen, partial pressure of oxygen is less, obviously that indicates that region requires the oxygen supply. That is why whatever the oxyhemoglobin is present, now it will dissociate and release the oxygen. That is why the curve shifts towards the right side. Okay. So in this way, left moving towards the curve, when it moves towards the left side, indicates near the alveolar region where the partial pressure of oxygen is more, the hemoglobin can have a more saturation point. Wherever the partial pressure of oxygen is less, there the saturation will be decreases, because in that region, as there is a demand of oxygen, the oxyhemoglobin dissociate and giving the oxygen supply to that particular region. Okay, so in this way we can study such type of the relationship of this partial pressure of oxygen and the hemoglobin saturation by this particular graph, and that is why here they told this graph as the oxygen dissociation curve. And here one of the very important key point or a note, we can say that every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. See here, every 100 ml of blood, that is which blood? Oxygenated blood, where the oxygen levels are more. Okay, such a oxygen rich blood, how much? About 100 ml can deliver about 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues. Okay, 5 ml to the tissues. Generally, 100 ml of blood, 100 ml of oxygenated blood actually contains about 20 ml of oxygen. Okay, see, 20 ml of oxygen. But here what they told? Out of that 20, only it is giving 5 ml to the tissues. So what happened to that remaining 15? So that 15 ml of oxygen actually it maintains as its reserves. Suppose during that time, if we will go for the exercise or a strenuous work, definitely there the tissues need more amount of the oxygen. So during those emergencies, the oxygen should be supplied to the cells. So for those emergency situations, actually our blood maintains a type of the 15 ml of reserve. That is why only it giving that 5 ml out of the 20 ml. Okay. That is the main reason. So that is why altogether we are saying simply 100 ml of oxygenated blood can supply 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues. Okay. So this is the important note.